The wind coming off Lake Michigan in November has a special kind of bite. It doesn't just chill your skin, it seeps into your bones, a damp, insistent cold that reminds you you're alive and fragile. I stood across the street from the Drake Hotel, the grand old lady of the magnificent mile, its name lit up in elegant, golden letters. A river of black cars flowed to the curb, depositing men in sharp tuxedos and women in gowns that shimmered under the city lights. I pulled my worn work jacket tighter, the collar rough against my neck. My hands were shoved deep in my pockets, balled into fists not against the cold, but against the ache in my chest. Through the massive plate glass window, I could see the party. It was a world of crystal chandeliers and muted gold, of champagne flutes and the silent, graceful movements of waiters. And in the middle of it all was my daughter, Emily. She was glowing. Her laughter was a bright, silent flash, her head tilted back as the young man beside her, her fiancé, leaned in to say something. He was handsome, with the easy confidence of someone who had never known a day of want. He wore his wealth like a perfectly tailored suit. Emily looked at him with a kind of adoration that squeezed the air from my lungs. It was a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. In my right pocket, my knuckles brushed against the small, hard corners of a gift box. Inside was a simple, tarnished silver locket, the one that had belonged to her mother. It felt 1,000 pounds heavy. My gaze drifted from Emily's happy face, down to my own hands. Even in the dim light, I could see the faint lines of grease etched around my fingernails, the calluses that no amount of scrubbing could ever fully soften. These were the hands that had fixed leaky faucets and unclogged drains to pay for her ballet lessons, her braces, her college degree. These were the hands she was now so ashamed of. Her voice echoed in my head, a ghost in the machine of my memory. It wasn't angry or cruel, which somehow made it worse. It was pleading, desperate. "Dad, please don't come. You'll embarrass me." The memory faded, leaving me back in the cold. 1 week. That's all it had been. 1 week since my world tilted on its axis. 1 week earlier, my world had been perfectly level. It began, as it always did, with the 5:30 a.m. alarm and the familiar gurgle of the coffee pot in the quiet of my small brick bungalow on the south side. The house was old, like everything in the neighborhood. It had settled into its foundation with a comfortable sigh years ago. The floors creaked, the pipes hummed a familiar tune, and every worn spot on the furniture told a story. It was my home. It was the home where I'd brought my wife, Maria, as a bride, and where we'd raised Emily. I sat at the kitchen table, the same spot I'd sat in for 30 years, and sipped my coffee. The steam warmed my face. Through the window, the sky was a deep, bruised purple, just beginning to yield to the dawn. On the mantelpiece in the living room, a photo of Maria smiled at me. Her eyes were bright, full of a life that had been stolen too soon by a sickness we never saw coming. "Well, Maria," I murmured, a ritual as ingrained as my first cup of coffee. "Another day. Let's see what Chicago has for us." My hands, resting on the warm ceramic mug, were a roadmap of my life. The knuckles were thick, the palms covered in calluses as tough as old leather. The creases in my skin were permanently stained with a faint, dark filigree of pipe dope and grease. There was a pale, smooth patch of skin on my left ring finger where a wedding band had rested for 25 years. These hands had held my newborn daughter, fixed her broken toys, and gripped the steering wheel of my van for countless hours, driving from one job to the next. They were a plumber's hands. Honest hands. And I'd never once been ashamed of them. After my coffee, I went through the motions. I checked the inventory in my van, a white Ford Transit that was more a workshop on wheels than a vehicle. Every wrench, every fitting, every coil of copper tubing had its place. There was a right way and a wrong way to do things, in plumbing and in life. My father, a plumber before me, had taught me that. Organization was the first step to a job well done. As I was securing a box of gaskets, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I wiped my hands on a rag out of habit before answering. It was Emily. My heart gave a familiar, pleasant little leap. "Hey, kiddo." "Hi, Dad." Her voice was different these days. Polished. The South Side accent we shared had been carefully sanded away, replaced by something more neutral, more professional. It was the voice of a downtown marketing executive, not the girl who used to leave greasy fingerprints on the refrigerator door. "Are you busy tonight?" "Never too busy for you." "What's up?" There was a slight hesitation. I have some news. Some really big news. And I'd like to tell you in person. Maybe I could come over for dinner." A wave of warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the morning chill. Emily coming for dinner was a rare occasion. Her life was busy, full of important meetings and social events that I only half understood. "Of course, you can." "That sounds wonderful. I'll make my lasagna." I could almost hear her smile through the phone. "Your famous lasagna. You're pulling out the big guns." "Only the best for my girl," I said, my own grin stretching wide. "You just tell me what time." 7. "And Dad, I'm bringing someone. A friend. His name is Leo." "Leo," I repeated. "Okay. The more the merrier. See you at 7 p.m. We hung up, and for the rest of the day, a sense of happy anticipation hummed just beneath the surface of my work. The first job was a clogged drain in an apartment in Pilsen. The young couple was frantic, with water backing up into their sink. I calmed them down, laid out my drop cloth, and got to work. There was a simple satisfaction in it, a pleasure in diagnosing a problem and making it right. While my snake auger worked its way through the blockage, the young woman watched me, looking at my hands. "You must have been doing this a long time," she said, not unkindly. "Long enough to know what I'm doing," I replied with a smile. "It's an honest trade. Puts food on the table." She nodded, her eyes flicking around her small but neat apartment. "We're saving up for a house. It feels like it's a million miles away." "You'll get there," I told her, pulling the auger back, a triumphant clump of hair and gunk at its end. "One day at a time. That's how you build anything worthwhile." I finished the job, cleaned up my tools, and left them with a functioning sink and a bill that was more than fair. The whole way to my next job, a water heater installation in Bridgeport, I thought about Emily and her big news. Maybe she'd gotten that promotion she'd been working so hard for. Maybe she was finally taking a real vacation. Whatever it was, the excitement in her voice was real. That afternoon, I finished work early. I stopped at the grocery store, taking my time in the aisles, picking out the best ricotta, the freshest basil, the block of Parmesan cheese I'd have to grate by hand. Maria's lasagna was a process, a labor of love. It couldn't be rushed. Back in my kitchen, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. The house, usually so quiet in the afternoons, came alive. The sizzle of onions and garlic in olive oil. The rich, savory smell of the meat sauce simmering on the stove. The rhythmic scrape of the cheese grater. These were the sounds and smells of family. Of home. As I layered the noodles, the sauce, and the creamy ricotta mixture into the baking dish, I was layering memories. Memories of a much younger Emily, her face dusted with flour, helping me in the kitchen. Memories of Maria, her arm around my waist, stealing a taste of the sauce from the wooden spoon. This lasagna wasn't just food. It was a connection. It was my way of holding on to the past while celebrating the future. It was the best thing I knew how to give. By 6:30, the lasagna was golden and bubbling, resting on the stovetop. The salad was tossed. A bottle of Chianti was breathing on the counter. The table was set with the good plates, the ones we only used for special occasions. The house was warm and filled with the kind of welcoming aroma that says, "You are loved." I washed my hands for the 10th time, scrubbing at the stubborn grease under my nails with a stiff brush until my skin was raw. I changed out of my work clothes and into a clean flannel shirt and my best pair of jeans. I looked at my reflection in the hallway mirror. A man in his mid-50s, his hair more salt than pepper, his face lined with the evidence of hard work and quiet grief. But tonight, my eyes were bright. Tonight, my daughter was coming home. I sat in my favorite armchair, the one with the permanent impression of my body in its cushions, and waited. The old clock on the wall ticked a steady, comforting rhythm. The scent of garlic and tomato hung in the air like a promise. Everything was ready. Everything was perfect. I was a father, a provider, a man who had built a life for his child with his own 2 hands. And I was proud. Whatever news Emily was bringing, I was ready to celebrate it with her. I just had to wait for my daughter to come home and share her happiness with me. The sound of a car door closing on the street outside jolted me from my reverie. The clock on the wall showed 7:01. I stood up, smoothing the front of my shirt, and walked to the door. Through the small glass pane, I saw Emily stepping onto the sidewalk. She looked beautiful. She was wearing a cream-colored coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. But it was the man who came around the car to join her that caught my full attention. He was tall and had a kind, open face. He moved with an easy grace, taking Emily's hand in his. Even from a distance, I could see he was gentle with her. They walked up the short path to my front door, their steps in sync. I took a deep breath, plastered a welcoming smile on my face, and opened the door before they could knock. "There she is," I said, my voice warmer than the air in the house. "Hi, Dad." Emily's smile seemed a little tight, a little forced. Her eyes darted around the porch, at the peeling paint on the railing, the old welcome mat. "This is Leo. Leo, this is my father, Frank." "It's a real pleasure to meet you, sir," Leo said, extending a hand. His grip was firm, his eyes meeting mine directly. There was no artifice in his gaze. "Emily has told me so much about you." "All good things, I hope," I said, shaking his hand. "Frank is fine. Come on in, both of you. It's cold out there. Dinner's ready." I stepped back, and they entered the small living room. I watched Leo's eyes scan the space. He took in the old, comfortable furniture, the shelves overflowing with books, the gallery of photos on the wall tracing Emily's life from a gap-toothed first grader to a proud college graduate. He wasn't looking with judgment, but with genuine curiosity. He stopped in front of the mantelpiece. "Is this your wife?" he asked, his voice soft, directed at me. I moved to stand beside him. "Yeah. That's Maria." "She's beautiful," he said simply. Emily, who had been nervously taking off her coat, interjected. "Dad, the house smells amazing. Is that your famous lasagna?" It felt like a deflection, a quick change of subject. "It is," I said, turning away from the photo. "Let's eat before it gets cold. Grab a seat." Dinner was awkward. I tried to fill the silence, asking Leo about his work. He explained he was in finance, working for his father's real estate development company. He spoke about it with a passion that surprised me, talking about revitalizing old neighborhoods and building sustainable community spaces. He was smart, articulate, and he seemed to genuinely care about his work. He asked me about my own. "So, Emily tells me you're retired, Frank," Leo said, taking a bite of salad. "What line of work were you in?" I froze for a split second, my fork halfway to my mouth. I glanced at Emily. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with a silent, desperate plea. I saw it all in that one look, the lie she had told, the fear that I would expose it. My heart, which had been so full of warmth and anticipation just an hour before, felt a sudden, sharp chill. Retired. That's what she told him. I looked down at my hands, resting on the table. My calloused, grease-stained hands. They didn't look like the hands of a retired investor. I swallowed. I was in construction and property management, I said, the lie feeling thick and foreign in my mouth. Mostly investment properties. Kept me busy. It was the vaguest, most plausible thing I could think of. Emily visibly relaxed, the tension leaving her shoulders. She shot me a small, grateful smile that felt like a punch in the gut. Leo nodded, impressed. That's fascinating. My dad built his company from the ground up. He has so much respect for people who know the guts of a building. He always says the most important man on any job site is the plumber. The irony was so thick I could have cut it with a lasagna server. I just nodded and forced a smile. He's a smart man. The rest of the meal passed in a blur of polite, meaningless conversation. Leo was everything a father could want for his daughter, kind, respectful, intelligent. He praised the lasagna, asked for a second helping, and insisted on helping me clear the plates. But all I could feel was a growing chasm between me and Emily. She sat there, beautiful and poised, in a world I had paid for but was no longer welcome in. After they had finished their coffee, Leo stood up. Frank, it was a true honor to meet you and thank you for the incredible dinner. We should probably get going. We have that early meeting tomorrow. I walked them to the door. Leo shook my hand again, his sincerity making my own deception feel even more wretched. I hope we can do this again soon, sir. Anytime, son, I managed to say. Emily hung back for a moment as Leo walked toward the car. In the dim light of the porch, she looked small and vulnerable. Thanks for dinner, Dad, she said quietly. And thank you for tonight. For you know. I just nodded, unable to speak. I wanted to ask her why. Why she felt she had to lie. Why my life's work, the very thing that gave her the life she had, was now a source of shame. But the words wouldn't come. The hurt was too fresh. So, I said, my voice raspy. What was the big news? She took a deep breath, and a genuine, brilliant smile finally broke through her anxiety. She held up her left hand. A diamond, so large it seemed to capture and refract all the light on the porch, sat on her ring finger. Leo asked me to marry him, she whispered. We're getting married. For a moment, the lie, the hurt, it all vanished. This was my daughter. My little girl. And she was happy. A surge of fatherly pride and love washed over me. That's wonderful news, I said, and this time, my smile was real. I pulled her into a hug, and for a second, she was just my kid again, her head resting on my shoulder. I'm so happy for you. I'm so happy, Dad, she said, her voice muffled by my shirt. She pulled away, her eyes shining. But then, the anxiety returned, clouding her face. This was it. The other shoe was about to drop. There's going to be an engagement party, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. Next Saturday. At the Drake. It's a very formal affair. The Van Cess are inviting all their business partners, their friends. It's a big deal for Leo's dad. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach, a cold, hard knot of dread. Dad, she wrung her hands, unable to meet my eyes. I told them you're a retired investor. A private man. That you travel a lot and probably won't be able to make it. The words hung in the cold air between us. She wasn't asking me not to come. She was telling me. She had already paved the way for my absence. She had erased me. Emily, I started, my voice barely a whisper. What are you saying? Tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her cheeks. Please, Dad. Just this once. Please understand. Their world is different. They wouldn't understand. The things they talk about, the way they are. I just want to fit in. For Leo. I love him so much. After the wedding, we can tell them the truth, I promise. But this party, it's so important. Please don't come. You'll embarrass me. You'll embarrass me. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. All the air went out of my body. My hand, which had been about to reach for her, dropped to my side. I looked at her tear-streaked face, this stranger who wore my daughter's features. I saw the genuine anguish in her eyes, the conflict that was tearing her apart. But it didn't lessen the sting. It didn't heal the wound she had just carved into my heart. 30 years of hard work. 30 years of sacrifice. Getting up in the dark on freezing winter mornings. Coming home, bone-tired, smelling of solder and sewage. Missing school plays because a pipe had burst in a high-rise downtown. All of it, every single moment, had been for her. To give her a better life. To make her proud. And in the end, I had become her dirty little secret. I have to go, she stammered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. She turned and practically ran to the car, not looking back. I stood on the porch, motionless, long after their taillights had disappeared down the street. The cold seeped into me, but I didn't feel it. All I felt was a hollow, aching void where my pride used to be. I walked back inside, the smell of lasagna now seeming sickly and cloying. The house felt empty again, but this was a different kind of emptiness. It was heavier. Lonelier. I walked over to the mantelpiece and picked up the photo of Maria. I looked into her smiling eyes. Our little girl is getting married, Maria, I whispered to the picture. She's marrying a good man. You'd like him. My voice broke. But she's ashamed of me. She's ashamed of what I do. What I am. I sank into my armchair, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The man who had walked out the door with Emily was Leo Vance. The son of Arthur Vance. The Vances were real estate royalty in Chicago. Vance Tower was one of the crown jewels of the skyline. They were a world away from my brick bungalow on the south side. A world where a plumber had no place. A world I had apparently built for my daughter, only to be locked out of it. And my heart, which had endured so much, felt like it was finally, irrevocably broken. The week that followed was one of the longest of my life. The house, once my sanctuary, became a cage. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, seemed to amplify the silence left in Emily's wake. Her words, "You'll embarrass me," played on a relentless loop in my mind, a soundtrack to my days. I'd wake up with them, a bitter taste in my mouth, and I'd go to sleep with them, a heavy weight on my chest. I tried to lose myself in work. I took on every job that came my way, from simple leaky faucets to complex, gut-wrenching sewer line replacements. I worked with a ferocity that bordered on punishment, hoping that physical exhaustion would numb the emotional agony. I'd come home late, covered in grime and sweat, too tired to even think about cooking. I ate cold sandwiches over the sink, staring blankly at the wall. The leftover lasagna sat in the fridge, a symbol of a celebration that had soured, until I finally threw it out, the act feeling like a final, sad admission of defeat. My phone would buzz with texts from Emily. "Thinking of you, Dad. The flower arrangements are going to be white roses. You always said Mom loved white roses. Just tried on the dress for the party. Wish you could see it." Each message was a small, sharp twist of the knife. She was trying to include me, to soothe her own guilt by pretending we were sharing this experience. But all it did was highlight the wall she had built between us. I didn't answer. I couldn't. What was I supposed to say? "Glad you're having fun at the party I'm forbidden to attend?" The silence was my only response, a cold, heavy blanket of hurt. Midweek, I was working on a boiler replacement in a basement in Beverly, a neighborhood of stately old homes not far from mine. It was a tough job, all muscle and leverage in a cramped, dusty space. My knuckles were scraped raw, and my back ached. My partner on the job was my old friend, Dave Kowalski. Dave was a bear of a man, a master electrician with a heart as big as his belly and a mouth that was never shy with an opinion. We'd known each other for 30 years, our kids had grown up together. He knew me better than almost anyone. He watched me struggle to tighten a large gas pipe fitting, my wrench slipping on the worn bolt. I let out a curse, my breath fogging in the cold basement air. "You're gonna strip that thing if you keep manhandling it like that, Frank," Dave said, wiping his hands on a rag. "What's eating you? You've been in a mood all week." I didn't answer, just repositioned the wrench and tried again. "Let me guess," he continued, undeterred. "Emily." I stopped, my arms going slack. I leaned my head against the cold copper pipe, feeling the deep chill of it against my forehead. "Is it that obvious?" "To me, it is." "You only get this quiet when it's about her," he said, his voice softening. "So, what did she do now? Forget your birthday?" "No, that's not till spring." "Let me see. She brought the new boyfriend home for dinner." "The rich kid? How'd that go?" I finally turned to look at him, the whole miserable story pouring out of me in a torrent of frustration and pain. I told him about Leo, about how much I liked the kid. I told him about the lie, the retired investor, and the shame that had coiled in my gut. And then I told him about the party. About the Drake Hotel. About Emily's tearful plea for me not to come. When I finished, the basement was silent except for the distant hum of the furnace fan. Dave just stood there, his round face uncharacteristically serious. He slowly shook his head. "That little girl," he started, then stopped himself. He took a deep breath. "Frank, I love Emily like she's my own, you know that. But that's a low blow. A real low blow." "She's scared, Dave," I said, defending her out of a reflex I couldn't control. "She's in over her head with this family. They're different." "Different? How?" "They put their pants on one leg at a time, same as us." "What, their money makes them a different species?" "That's garbage. You taught her better than that. Maria taught her better than that." He pointed a thick finger at me. "You are a good man, Frank Miller. You're the most honest man I know. You built a life for that girl, a good one, with those two hands. If she's ashamed of that, then the problem isn't with you. It's with her." His words were blunt, but they were true. Hearing them from someone else validated the anger that was simmering beneath my hurt. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Crash the party? Make a scene? Humiliate her in front of her new fancy family?" Dave leaned against a support beam, crossing his burly arms. "I'm not saying that. But I am saying you shouldn't let her do this to you. Or to herself. You know what this is? This is a crack in the foundation. You, of all people, should know what happens if you don't fix a crack in the foundation. The whole house comes down eventually." He was right. Plumbing had taught me that. Small leaks become floods. Small cracks become catastrophic failures. Emily's shame was a small leak, but it was poisoning the very pipes of our relationship. "Maybe you should go," Dave said quietly. I stared at him. "You just said." "I know what I said. I'm not saying go make a scene. I'm saying go be her father. Show up. Not in a tuxedo to play their game. But as you are. As Frank Miller, the man who raised her. Let her see you, and let that fancy family see you. Let them see what a real man looks like. Not some retired investor ghost she invented, but her dad. A man who isn't ashamed of who he is and what he does." He picked up his toolbox. "Think about it. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is just showing up." Dave's words echoed in my head for the rest of the day, and into the next. The whole house comes down eventually. He was right. If I let this go, if I accepted my role as the embarrassing secret, what would be next? Would I be hidden away from my own grandchildren one day? Would I become a footnote in my daughter's life, a story she edited for a more desirable audience? The thought was unbearable. It was worse than the initial sting of her words. This wasn't just about a party. It was about my place in her life. It was about my identity, my dignity. Meanwhile, Emily's life seemed to be moving at a dizzying pace. She would occasionally send me photos. A picture of her and Leo at a gallery opening, champagne in hand. A shot of her at a fitting with her future mother-in-law, a severe-looking woman named Carol Vance, who had a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. In that photo, Emily looked strained, her smile a little too bright, a little too brittle. She was performing. I could see her playing a part, and it broke my heart all over again. She was caught in a trap of her own making. The deeper she went, the harder it would be to get out. The lie was a seed she had planted, and now it was sprouting, its vines wrapping around her, choking the girl I once knew. She was so focused on impressing the Vances, on securing her place in their world, that she couldn't see what she was sacrificing, her own integrity. Her own story. The day of the party, Saturday, dawned gray and overcast. A perfect reflection of my mood. I spent the morning in the garage, tinkering with the engine of my old lawnmower, even though it was November and I wouldn't need it for months. I just needed something to fix, something mechanical and straightforward. A problem with a clear solution. Unlike the problem with my daughter. My phone rang around noon. It was Emily. I stared at the screen for a long moment before finally swiping to answer. Dad? Her voice was small, hesitant. I'm here, Em. I just wanted to call. I know I haven't heard from you. I'm sorry if I upset you. You didn't upset me, Emily, I lied. I've just been busy. Oh. Okay. She sounded relieved. Too relieved. Well, the party is tonight. I'm really nervous. But excited, too. You'll be fine, I said, my voice flat. You look beautiful in everything you wear. You'll be the star of the show. There was a long pause. I could hear the unspoken words hanging between us, the invitation she couldn't give and the acceptance I couldn't offer. I love you, Dad, she said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I love you too, kiddo, I said. And I did. That was the hell of it. Beneath the hurt, beneath the anger, the love was still there, as solid and unshakable as the foundation of my house. And it was that love that was tearing me in two. We hung up. I put down my wrench and walked back into the house. I stood in the quiet living room and looked again at Maria's picture. Her smile was a constant, a fixed point in my shifting world. What do I do, Maria? I whispered. What would you do? I couldn't hear an answer, of course. But I could almost feel her presence, a sense of calm strength. Maria was never afraid of the truth. She faced everything head-on, from a leaky roof to her final diagnosis. She would have told Emily that love built on a lie is a house of cards. It's beautiful for a moment, but the first strong wind will bring it all down. Dave's words came back to me. Sometimes the strongest statement you can make is just showing up. My decision, when it finally came, felt less like a choice and more like a necessity. It wasn't about anger or revenge. It wasn't about embarrassing Emily. It was about saving her. It was about saving us. It was about showing her that the foundation I had built for her was made of something stronger than money or status. It was built of love, honesty, and hard work. And that was nothing to be ashamed of. It was everything to be proud of. I would go to the party. Okay. I will now proceed with Act 2, Part 2. The decision to go was one thing, figuring out how to go was another. My first instinct, a brief, fleeting fantasy, was to rent a tuxedo. I imagined myself walking in, looking the part, playing the role Emily had written for me. I could nod politely, talk vaguely about markets and portfolios, and blend into the gilded wallpaper. I could give Emily what she wanted, an acceptable, sanitized version of her father. But the thought turned sour in my mouth almost as soon as it formed. It would be just another lie. It would be an admission that who I really was wasn't good enough. It would be validating her shame. No, if I was going to do this, I had to do it as myself. As Frank Miller. Not the retired investor, but the plumber. I spent the afternoon preparing, but not in the way one usually prepares for a black tie affair. I didn't go to a tailor, I went to my laundry room. I took out my work uniform, the sturdy, navy blue Dickies shirt and matching pants. It was my newest set, reserved for client meetings in fancy office buildings, the one least stained with the ghosts of past jobs. I washed it, ironed it with a care I usually reserved for holiday tablecloths, creating sharp, precise creases down the front of the pants and the sleeves of the shirt. Over the left pocket, the name, Frank, was embroidered in neat, white script. Above it was the logo of my one-man company, Miller Plumbing and Heating, with a simple graphic of a wrench and a flame. Next, I turned to my hands. I scrubbed them with a brush and pumice soap until they were red and raw, but the fine lines of ingrained grease remained, a permanent tattoo of my trade. I clipped my nails, filing them meticulously. They were clean as they could ever be. They were still a working man's hands, calloused, thick, and strong. They told my story. Finally, there was the gift. I went to the small, cedar box on my dresser where I kept my most precious things. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was the silver locket that had belonged to Maria. It was simple, heart-shaped, and worn smooth with time. I opened it. On one side was a tiny, faded photo of me from when we were first married, my hair dark and thick, my smile cocky and young. On the other side was a picture of her, her head thrown back in laughter. It was the photo I loved most. This locket was meant to be her wedding gift. I had planned to give it to her on her wedding day, a piece of her mother to carry with her. Giving it to her now, at her engagement party, felt different. It felt more urgent. It felt like a reminder of where she came from, of a love that was pure and unpretentious. I placed the locket inside a small, plain blue box and wrapped it carefully, not with fancy paper, but with simple brown twine. It was a humble gift, a stark contrast to the glittering diamond on her finger. But it was real. As evening approached, the sky outside deepened to a bruised purple. The last of the daylight faded. I got dressed. Staring at my reflection in the mirror, I saw not a guest for a party at the Drake, but a man on his way to a job. My uniform was clean and pressed. My boots were polished. I looked neat, professional, and completely, utterly out of place for the event I was about to walk into. A wave of doubt washed over me. Was this a terrible mistake? Was I about to destroy my daughter's happiness out of some selfish need to prove a point? I thought of her face, twisted with anxiety when she begged me not to come. The memory was a physical pain. But then, I thought of her as a little girl, sitting on my lap, her small hand tracing the calluses on my palm. "Your hands are strong, Daddy," she used to say. "They can fix anything." Maybe they still could. I picked up the small gift box and walked out to my van. The familiar smell of copper and PVC pipe filled my nostrils as I opened the door. It was the smell of my life, my livelihood. It smelled of honesty. I put the gift on the passenger seat, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb, leaving my quiet street behind and heading toward the glittering, indifferent skyline of downtown Chicago. The drive was surreal. My lumbering work van felt like a barge amidst a sea of sleek, dark sedans and limousines all flowing toward the same destination. As I got closer to the magnificent mile, the city grew brighter, more ostentatious. The storefronts of Gucci and Chanel glowed like alien spaceships. I felt like a trespasser, a ghost from another world. Finding parking was a nightmare. I couldn't use the valet. The thought of handing the keys to my tool-filled van to a kid in a red jacket was almost comical. I finally found a spot in a public garage several blocks away. The walk to the hotel was cold and windy. The icy gusts off the lake seemed to mock my thin work shirt. Men in tuxedos and women in fur coats hurried past me, their laughter carried away on the wind. They didn't even see me. I was invisible. And then I was there, standing under the grand awning of the Drake Hotel. The same spot I'd stood a week ago, only this time, I wasn't going to stay on the outside looking in. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before descending into a dark, flooded basement with a job to do. I pushed open the heavy brass and glass door and stepped inside. The sudden warmth and quiet of the lobby was a shock to the system. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and hothouse flowers. A string quartet was playing softly in a far corner. The floors were polished marble, the ceilings impossibly high. My work boots, which had seemed so sturdy and practical on the pavement, now felt clunky and loud on the pristine floor. I saw a sign on a gilded easel, the Vance Miller engagement party. Gold Coast Ballroom. An arrow pointed me up a grand, carpeted staircase. Every step I took felt like a drumbeat, echoing the frantic pounding of my own heart. I tightened my grip on the small gift box in my hand. It was my shield, my reason for being here. I reached the top of the stairs and stood at the entrance to the ballroom. It was exactly as I had seen through the window, but 100 times more overwhelming from the inside. A universe of shimmering gold and crystal. The room was filled with people who all seemed to know each other, their confident laughter and easy conversation a language I didn't speak. They were beautiful, polished, and exuded an aura of effortless power. And then I saw her. Emily. She was standing in a small group near the center of the room, holding a flute of champagne. She was breathtaking. Her dress was a simple, elegant column of dark blue silk that made her stand out like a sapphire in a sea of black and white. She was laughing at something a well-dressed older woman was saying, but again, I saw the tension in her smile. She was playing the part. And she was playing it well. For a moment, I almost turned around. I could leave now. She would never know I had come. I could spare her the very thing she feared most. But then I saw Leo. He was standing beside her, his arm resting lightly on the small of her back. He wasn't talking to anyone. He was just looking at Emily, and the expression on his face was one of pure, unadulterated love. It was clear and simple and true. And I knew, in that instant, that he deserved the truth. He deserved to know the real woman he was marrying, and the real man who was her father. I took one more breath. I squared my shoulders. And I started to walk into the room. The first few steps were the hardest. It felt like wading through thick mud. I was acutely aware of every detail that marked me as an outsider. The heavy tread of my work boots on the plush carpet. The simple, utilitarian fabric of my uniform against the sea of silk and cashmere. The way my calloused hands, one clutching a small, humbly wrapped box, seemed to belong to another species entirely. The low hum of conversation didn't stop, but I felt the shift. It was a subtle change in the room's atmosphere, the way a herd of grazing animals might sense a predator nearby without yet seeing it. A few heads turned. A quiet murmur rippled through a nearby group. Eyes flickered over me, a quick, dismissive assessment, before turning away. I was an anomaly, a glitch in their perfectly curated matrix. A problem that would surely be dealt with by the hotel staff shortly. I kept my eyes fixed on Emily. I had to reach her. I navigated through the clusters of guests, murmuring, "Excuse me," as I passed. My voice sounded rough and out of place against the backdrop of sophisticated chatter. The path across the ballroom floor felt a mile long. With every step, the invisible weight of their collective judgment pressed down on me. Leo saw me first. His back had been partially to the entrance, but he turned slightly, perhaps sensing the change in the room's energy. His eyes scanned the crowd and then landed on me. His polite smile faltered, replaced by a look of pure confusion. His brow furrowed. He glanced at Emily, who was still engaged in conversation, then back at me. He clearly didn't recognize me. Why would he? He was looking for a retired investor, not a plumber in a work uniform. But then Emily, following Leo's gaze, turned her head. Our eyes met across the glittering, crowded room. For a heartbeat, the world stopped. The music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. I saw the recognition dawn in her eyes, immediately followed by a wave of sheer, unadulterated horror. The color drained from her face, leaving her ashen. The champagne flute in her hand trembled, the golden liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. Her smile, the one she had been working so hard to maintain, didn't just fade, it shattered. She looked at my uniform. My name, Frank, embroidered over my heart. The company logo. Her eyes then dropped to my hands, and I saw a flicker of the old shame, the very emotion that had started this whole nightmare. It was all there, a raw, open wound on her face for everyone to see. The woman she had been talking to, a formidable-looking figure with perfectly coiffed silver hair and a string of pearls, noticed Emily's distress. "Emily, my dear, are you all right? You look as if you've seen a ghost." Emily couldn't speak. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly agape. Her carefully constructed world was crumbling around her, and the architect of its destruction was her own father. This was the moment of truth. The moment I had dreaded and prepared for all at once. My resolve, which had felt so firm just moments before, began to tremble. Seeing the genuine panic in my daughter's eyes was a physical blow. The urge to turn and run, to spare her this public agony, was immense. But I remembered Maria's smile. I remembered Dave's words, "You gotta fix the crack in the foundation." This was it. This was the moment to fix it, or watch the whole house come down. I took a breath and continued forward, my steps slow and deliberate. I was no longer just walking toward my daughter, I was walking toward the truth. The space around Emily and her group began to clear, a subtle, unconscious parting of the waves as people sensed a scene was about to unfold. The quiet murmurs grew louder, more insistent. Who was this man? What was he doing here? Leo, ever the protector, stepped slightly in front of Emily. His confusion was now mixed with a protective concern. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but firm. He was addressing me as he would any stranger who had wandered into the wrong place. Before I could answer, Emily found her voice. It was a choked, desperate whisper. "Dad? What are you doing here?" The word "Dad" hung in the air, electric and shocking. Leo's head snapped toward her, his eyes wide with disbelief. The silver-haired woman's eyebrows shot up to her hairline. The lie was exposed. In that single, panicked word, Emily's entire fabrication had been laid bare. "I came to see you, Em," I said, my voice quiet but clear. I stopped a few feet away, creating a small, tense circle in the middle of the grand ballroom. "I came to give you your engagement present." I held out the small, simple box. Emily didn't look at the box. She couldn't take her eyes off my uniform, off the reality of who I was standing in the flesh before her and her fiancé's entire world. Tears welled in her eyes, born not of joy or relief, but of pure, profound humiliation. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered, each word a tiny, sharp icicle. "I asked you not to. I begged you." She started toward me, her intention clear. She was going to grab my arm and pull me out of there, to hustle me through the door and out of sight, to try and contain the damage. Her face was a mask of frantic desperation. "Emily, wait," Leo said, putting a hand on her arm, his own face a canvas of conflicting emotions. He looked from her tear-streaked face to mine, the pieces of the puzzle clicking into place in his mind. The retired investor, the awkward dinner, Emily's nervousness, it was all starting to make sense. But he didn't look angry. He just looked lost. But Emily didn't stop. She brushed past him, her eyes locked on mine. She was just a few feet away from me now, her hand reaching out, her expression pleading with me to disappear. The entire room seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable, excruciating confrontation. This was my moment of decision. I could let her lead me away, accept the shame she was trying to heap upon me, and retreat back into the shadows she had assigned me. Or I could stand my ground. I stood my ground. I looked past her desperate, tearful face, and for the first time, I scanned the room for a man I had only seen in newspaper clippings. A man with a commanding presence and an air of authority. Arthur Vance. Leo's father. And then I saw him. He was standing on a small, raised dais at the far end of the room, near the musicians. He hadn't been part of the central drama, but he was watching it unfold. He was a tall man, impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit. His hair was silver, his face was stern and lined with the deep grooves of a man accustomed to making billion-dollar decisions. He was holding a microphone, presumably about to make a speech. But now, he was just staring, his expression unreadable, as this bizarre scene played out in the middle of his party. Our eyes met for a brief second. There was no recognition in his gaze. To him, I was just a problem. A disruption. Emily was almost upon me. Her hand was reaching for my arm. The whispers in the room had grown into a low, buzzing hum of scandalized excitement. And then, a voice cut through the air, amplified and powerful, silencing the entire room. Wait. It was Arthur Vance, speaking into the microphone. His voice wasn't angry or alarmed. It was something else. Something I couldn't identify. Every head in the ballroom, including Emily's, swiveled toward the stage. Arthur Vance lowered the microphone and slowly, deliberately, began to descend the 2 short steps from the dais to the ballroom floor. He didn't take his eyes off me. He started walking, not with the hurried pace of a man trying to manage a crisis, but with a slow, measured tread. He walked past the clusters of his astonished guests. He walked past his son and his future daughter-in-law. He walked straight toward me, his stern face a mask of intense concentration. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint, sad notes of the string quartet fading into silence. Time seemed to slow down. Each step Arthur Vance took on the plush carpet was a silent, thunderous beat in the heart of the ballroom. The air was thick with anticipation, 100 different scenarios playing out in the minds of the onlookers. The most likely one, I thought, was that the patriarch of the Vance family was about to personally and icily eject the wedding crasher who had so thoroughly ruined the evening's ambience. Emily stood frozen between us, a statue of horrified disbelief. Her hand, which had been reaching for my arm, dropped to her side. She looked from the powerful, approaching figure of her future father-in-law to me, the source of her mortification. Her face was a tragic canvas of a nightmare come to life. She looked trapped, exposed, with nowhere to run. Leo remained a few feet away, his hand still half extended toward Emily, his face a mask of profound confusion. He was watching his father, a man he surely knew to be reserved and intensely private, command the center of the room with a gravity that was unusual even for him. I held my ground, my heart hammering against my ribs. My gaze was locked with Arthur Vance's. As he drew closer, I could see his face more clearly. The stern lines were still there, but his eyes held something else. It wasn't anger. It was a flicker of something old, something buried. A dawning recognition that seemed impossible. How could this man, this titan of industry, possibly know me? He stopped directly in front of me, so close I could see the fine silk weave of his tie. The silence in the room was absolute, a crushing weight. The guests leaned in, craning their necks, eager witnesses to the final, dramatic act of my expulsion. Arthur Vance's eyes left my face and traveled down, taking in my clean, pressed work shirt. He saw the embroidered name, Frank, and the logo beneath it, Miller Plumbing and Heating. His gaze lingered there for a long moment. A strange, imperceptible shift occurred in his expression. The hard lines around his mouth seemed to soften. The coldness in his eyes thawed, replaced by a warmth that was startling. He looked back up at my face, his eyes searching mine. "Frank Miller," he said, his voice no longer the booming command from the microphone, but a low, disbelieving query. It was a question, but it sounded like a confirmation. I could only nod, my throat too tight to speak. And then, Arthur Vance did something that sent a shockwave through the entire room. He smiled. It wasn't a polite, social smile. It was a wide, genuine, all-encompassing grin that reached his eyes and transformed his entire demeanor. And then he laughed, a short, sharp bark of pure astonishment. Before anyone could process what was happening, he reached out not to push me away, but to clap a firm, friendly hand on my shoulder. His grip was strong. "Frank Miller," he said again, his voice now filled with an emotion I could only describe as joyful relief. "My God! I don't believe it. After all these years." He then did the single most unexpected thing he could possibly have done. He pulled me into a hug. It wasn't a formal, air-kissing embrace. It was a real hug, a back-thumping, heartfelt embrace of old comrades reuniting after a long war. The smell of his expensive cologne mixed with the faint, clean scent of laundry soap from my uniform. I stood there, stiff with shock, in the arms of one of the most powerful men in Chicago. I could feel the collective gasp of the entire room, a soft intake of breath from 100 stunned mouths. I glanced over Arthur's shoulder and saw my daughter. Her face was a study in absolute, cosmic bewilderment. Her fear and shame were still there, but they were now being crowded out by an emotion so new and jarring she didn't know how to process it. Leo looked equally stunned, his jaw practically on the floor. Arthur Vance pulled back, still gripping my shoulders, his eyes shining. He turned his head slightly, addressing not just me, but the entire, silent audience. "Everyone," he began, his voice ringing with authority and a newfound passion, "you're all probably wondering who this man is." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned back to me, his smile never wavering. "You have no idea," he said to me, his voice low and intense, "how many times I've told this story. How many times I've wondered what happened to you." He then turned back to the crowd, his gaze sweeping across the room, commanding their complete attention. He still had one hand firmly on my shoulder, a gesture that anchored me to him, that declared to the world that I was with him. 15 years ago, Arthur began, his voice taking on the quality of a seasoned storyteller, "I was not the man you see before you. I was on the verge of losing everything. Everything. I had sunk every dollar I had, and every dollar I could borrow, into my first major project. My legacy. Vance Tower." A murmur went through the crowd. Vance Tower was a landmark, the building that had launched his empire. It was the dead of winter, he continued, his voice dropping. You might remember it. The historic blizzard of that year. The city was shut down for 3 days. The temperature dropped to 20 below zero, with the wind chill making it feel like 60 below. And in the middle of that storm, in my half-finished, skeletal skyscraper, a disaster happened. A main water riser on the 20th floor froze and burst. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Not a leak. A catastrophic failure. Gallons upon gallons of water per minute, pouring down through the structure. It was threatening the newly poured concrete, the electrical systems, the very integrity of the foundation. My engineers, the best in the city, said it was impossible to reach the shut-off valve. The conditions were too dangerous. The site was inaccessible. They told me to wait for the storm to pass. But I knew that if we waited, the building would be lost. My company would be bankrupt. My dream would be a frozen, concrete tomb. He looked around the room, making eye contact with his guests, with his wife, with his son. And then his eyes came back to me. I was in my site trailer, watching my life's work wash away, when my foreman told me there was one person willing to try. A plumber. A guy who said he could get to it. He showed up in a beat-up van, alone. He didn't ask for a deposit. He didn't ask for hazard pay. He just looked at the blueprints, grabbed his tools, and went inside. My own memory, long dormant, flared to life. The howling wind. The biting, painful cold. The darkness of the unfinished building, lit only by my headlamp. The treacherous ice covering every surface. The roar of the water, a deafening monster in the concrete shell. This man, Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion as he squeezed my shoulder, worked for 36 straight hours. In the dark. In sub-zero temperatures. He navigated treacherous, icy corridors and waded through freezing water. He had to cut through a concrete wall to bypass the blockage and manually seal the pipe. He did what an entire team of acclaimed engineers said was impossible. He took a deep breath, his composure wavering for just a second. He saved my building. He saved my company. He saved my future. When it was all over, when the water was finally shut off, he was covered in ice, his hands were blue, but the job was done. I tried to pay him, I offered him a bonus that was more than the cost of a new house. And you know what he did? Arthur looked directly at Leo, and then at Emily. He refused. He handed me a bill for the exact cost of his time and materials. He said, "I'm not a hero, Mr. Vance. I'm a plumber. This is the job." And then he packed up his tools, got in his van, and drove off into the snow. I never saw him again. I never even got to properly thank him. Until tonight. He turned his whole body to face me, his eyes filled with a deep, profound gratitude that transcended the 15 years that had passed. "Frank Miller," he said, his voice ringing through the silent, gilded ballroom. "You are not a guest here tonight. You are the guest of honor. You are not an embarrassment. You are a hero. My hero. And you are the man who, with his own 2 hands, saved everything that I hold dear." For a long moment, the only sound in the Gold Coast ballroom was the echo of Arthur Vance's last word, hero. It hung in the air, shimmering and unbelievable, displacing all the oxygen. The silence that followed wasn't the tense, awkward quiet from before. It was a silence of awe, of recalibration, as every single person in that room re-evaluated the man in the work uniform standing before them. Then, a single person began to clap. It was a tentative, isolated sound. Then another joined, and another, and in a matter of seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in a wave of thunderous applause. It wasn't polite, perfunctory clapping. It was a genuine, roaring ovation. These people, these titans of finance and society, were on their feet, their faces turned toward me, their hands coming together in a deafening salute. I just stood there, speechless, my hand still clutching the small gift box. The warmth of Arthur's hand on my shoulder was the only thing keeping me grounded. This was a reality I could never have imagined in my wildest dreams. The applause wasn't for a retired investor, or a character in a play. It was for me. Frank Miller. The plumber. I looked through the crowd of applauding strangers and found Leo. He was staring at me, his mouth slightly agape, his eyes shining with a look of pure, unadulterated admiration. The confusion was gone, replaced by a dawning respect that was so profound it was almost worshipful. He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as an obstacle to his happiness, but as the very foundation of the woman he loved. He then looked at his father, a proud, grateful smile spreading across his face. And then I looked at Emily. She was still standing in the same spot, motionless amidst the standing ovation. But she was no longer the epicenter of a social disaster. She was the daughter of the hero. The applause wasn't just for me, in a way, it was for her, too. Tears were streaming down her face, but these were not the tears of humiliation I had seen just moments before. These were tears of shock, of release, of a pride so overwhelming it was painful. Her carefully constructed facade had not just been cracked, it had been obliterated, and in its place, something raw and true was being born. The shame that had contorted her features was gone, replaced by a look of profound regret. She wasn't looking at my uniform anymore. She was looking at my face. At her father. The man she had tried to hide, now being celebrated by the very people she had been so desperate to impress. The irony was devastating, but it was also liberating. The applause eventually subsided, leaving a warm, buzzing energy in the room. Arthur Vance, still beaming, leaned in close to me, his voice a low rumble just for me. I meant every word, Frank. I've looked for you over the years. Miller, it's a common name. I never could track you down. I was never hiding, I managed to say, my voice hoarse. Just busy. Always another pipe to fix. He laughed, a rich, genuine sound. I'll bet. He then turned to the crowd once more. Please, everyone, enjoy the evening. We have more than an engagement to celebrate tonight. We celebrate a reunion of old friends. He guided me toward the small circle where Leo and Emily stood. As we approached, the silver-haired woman with the pearls, who I now realized was Carol Vance, Leo's mother, looked at me with entirely new eyes. The disdain was gone, replaced by a flustered, respectful curiosity. Arthur, you never told me the full story, she said, her voice a little breathless. Some stories you save for the right moment, my dear, Arthur said, winking at me. But I wasn't looking at her. I was looking at Emily. As I stepped in front of her, she flinched, as if expecting a word of rebuke, a quiet, I told you so. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her breath coming in shuddering little gasps. I didn't say anything. I just held out the small, humbly wrapped box. My hand was steady now. She looked down at the gift as if it were a sacred object. Her own hands, manicured and delicate, trembled as she reached out to take it. The simple brown twine felt rough against her smooth skin. She fumbled with the knot, her fingers clumsy with emotion. Leo stepped forward and gently put his hand on her back, a silent gesture of support. He looked at me over her head, his eyes conveying a message of sincere apology and gratitude. A silent promise that he understood. Emily finally got the box open. She lifted the lid and her breath caught in her throat. She stared down at the tarnished, heart-shaped silver locket nestled in the faded velvet. She lifted it out, her thumb stroking the smooth, worn surface. It was a piece of her past, of our shared history, a relic from a simpler, more honest world than the one she had been trying to conquer. It was your mother's, I said softly, my voice for her ears only. I wanted you to have it. She clicked it open. She saw the tiny photo of her mother, forever laughing, and the picture of the young, hopeful man who was her father. A sob escaped her lips, a raw, ragged sound of a heart breaking and healing all at once. Oh, Dad, she whispered, the words choked with tears. She looked up at me, her face stripped bare of all pretense. The marketing executive was gone. The social climber was gone. All that was left was my daughter, my little girl, her eyes filled with a universe of regret. I'm so sorry. I am so sorry. She didn't need to say more. I saw it all in her eyes. The foolishness of her shame, the weight of her lie, the crushing realization of how badly she had misjudged everything, especially me. I did the only thing a father could do. I opened my arms. She fell into them, collapsing against my chest, her body shaking with sobs. She wrapped her arms around my neck and held on tight, as if she were afraid I might vanish. I held her close, my rough, calloused hand stroking her hair, the expensive silk of her dress bunching up under my grip. I could feel her tears soaking the shoulder of my work shirt. The same shirt she had been so ashamed of was now absorbing her apology, her remorse, her love. It's okay, Em, I whispered into her hair. It's okay. I've got you. Over her shoulder, I saw Arthur and Leo watching us, their expressions soft and understanding. Arthur gave me a slow, respectful nod. He had not only saved me from humiliation, he had given me back my daughter. After a long moment, Emily's sobs subsided into quiet sniffles. She pulled back, her face blotchy and tear-streaked, but her eyes were clear for the first time in a long time. She looked at the locket in her palm, then back at me. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick. She clutched the locket to her chest, holding it like a lifeline. It was in that moment that Arthur Vance clapped his hands together, his mind clearly already racing ahead. "This calls for a proper announcement," he declared to the room at large. "In light of this reunion, I'd like to make an addition to this evening's celebration." He grinned, his eyes twinkling with a new idea. Effective immediately, the Vance Corporation is proud to establish a new philanthropic initiative. A scholarship fund. It will be dedicated to providing full-ride college educations for the children of skilled trade workers in the city of Chicago: the plumbers, the electricians, the carpenters, the people who actually build this city with their hands. Another wave of applause, more respectful this time, rippled through the room. Arthur's grin widened. "And it seems only fitting," he said, looking directly at me with profound respect, "that it be called the Miller Vance Scholarship Fund." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My name. Our name. Linked forever with his. Not as a secret, not as a source of shame, but as a banner of honor, a symbol of integrity and hard work, to be celebrated and displayed for the entire city to see. It was more than an apology, it was a restoration. It was my name, and my life's work, being given the dignity and respect I had always known it deserved, but had never dared to ask for. The rest of the evening passed in a dreamlike haze. The dynamic of the party had been fundamentally altered. I was no longer an intruder, I was a curiosity, a legend, the centerpiece of the night's incredible story. People who had looked through me just an hour before now approached me with deference, their hands extended, their eyes filled with a newfound respect. They wanted to shake the hand of the man who had saved Vance Tower. They introduced themselves CEOs, surgeons, judges, and asked me about my work, their questions no longer laced with condescension but with genuine interest. I answered as I always did, simply and honestly. I spoke about the satisfaction of solving a problem, of making things right. I didn't embellish the story Arthur had told, if anything, I downplayed it. I wasn't a hero, just a man doing his job. And the more I insisted on my own ordinariness, the more fascinated they seemed to be. It was as if, in their world of abstract figures and complex deals, the concept of tangible, physical work was a forgotten, noble art. Through it all, Emily stayed by my side. She didn't let go of my arm, her touch a constant, reassuring pressure. She had wiped her tears, and though her eyes were still puffy, a quiet, steady light had returned to them. She held her head high, but her pride was different now. It wasn't the brittle, anxious pride of someone trying to fit in. It was a deep, solid pride in her father. For every person who came to speak to me, she would make the introduction, her voice clear and strong, "This is my father, Frank Miller." She said the words, "my father," like a queen presenting her crown jewels. Leo was a quiet, constant presence on her other side. He had wrapped an arm around her waist, and the two of them, with me in the middle, formed a small, unbreakable unit. He looked at me with an easy, comfortable respect. The lie that had stood between us was gone, and in its place was a foundation of truth far stronger than anything Emily could have fabricated. "Frank," he said at one point, leaning in so only I could hear. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry. For my part in this. I should have seen how much pressure she was under. I love her, and I'm so incredibly proud to be marrying into your family." "You've got nothing to be sorry for, son," I told him, clapping him on the back. "You love her. That's all that matters." The most telling conversation came when Carol Vance approached us again. Her severe expression had been replaced by one of cautious warmth. She looked at the locket that now hung around Emily's neck. That's a beautiful piece, Emily, she said. A family heirloom? It was my mother's, Emily said, her hand instinctively going to it. My dad just gave it to me. Carol looked at me, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. Arthur has always said that the foundation is the most important part of any structure, she said, her voice softer than I would have thought possible. It seems he was right in more ways than one. Welcome to the family, Frank. It was an offering of peace, an acceptance. A formal surrender. As the party began to wind down, Arthur Vance pulled the three of us aside. Frank, I won't keep you. I know this probably isn't your scene. But I want you to know, my offer from 15 years ago still stands. Anything you need. Anything at all. You just say the word. Thank you, Arthur, I said, shaking his hand firmly. But I have everything I need. My eyes drifted to Emily, and she gave me a watery, grateful smile. It was true. My little house on the south side, my trusty van, my work that kept my hands busy and my mind clear. And now, my daughter, her heart returned to the right place. I was a wealthy man. Leo drove us home, not just Emily, but me, too. He insisted. He said there was no way my van was staying in a public garage overnight. He would drive me to pick it up in the morning. So I sat in the plush leather passenger seat of his expensive German car, with Emily in the back, leaning forward between the seats, her hand resting on my shoulder. We drove through the glittering streets of downtown Chicago, the city lights painting streaks across the windows. It was the same city I had left hours ago, but it felt entirely different. We were quiet for most of the ride, a comfortable, peaceful silence. The kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. When we pulled up in front of my small brick house, it looked so humble, so unassuming compared to the grandeur we had just left. The porch light I'd left on cast a warm, welcoming glow. I'll just be a minute, Emily said to Leo as he put the car in park. She got out and walked with me up the short path to the front door. The November air was still cold, but I didn't feel it. We stood on the porch, the same spot where she had broken my heart just 1 week before. She looked at the peeling paint on the railing, the worn welcome mat, but this time, there was no shame in her eyes. There was only love. Dad, she started, her voice thick with emotion. There aren't words to say how sorry I am. For being ashamed. For being a coward. For asking you to hide who you are. Who we are. You don't have to say it, I said, my voice gentle. I know. But I want to, she insisted, her eyes locking with mine. Tonight seeing you there, so calm and strong, and hearing what Mr. Vance said, I've never been more proud in my entire life. Not of the money, or the party, or any of this. She gestured vaguely back toward the city. I was proud of you. My dad. The plumber who can fix anything. A tear slipped down her cheek, and I reached out and wiped it away with my thumb. Your hands aren't embarrassing, Dad, she whispered, taking my hand in both of hers, her smooth, soft fingers lacing through my rough, calloused ones. They're a testament. They're proof of every sacrifice you ever made for me. They're the hands that built my life. And I will never, ever be ashamed of them again. She leaned in and kissed my cheek, a long, lingering kiss full of a week's worth of apology and a lifetime of love. I love you, Dad, she said. I love you too, kiddo, I replied, my own voice thick. Always. She gave my hand one last squeeze before turning and walking back to the car, back to her fiancé, back to her new life. But I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that she would never again forget where she came from. I watched as the expensive car pulled away, its red taillights disappearing down the quiet, familiar street. I stood on my porch for a long moment, the little house behind me feeling more like a palace than ever before. I walked inside and closed the door, the click of the latch sounding final and satisfying. I looked around the living room, at the comfortable, worn furniture, the photos on the wall. I walked over to the mantelpiece and looked at the smiling picture of my wife. "Well, Maria," I whispered, a small smile on my own face. "It seems our little girl found her way. The foundation is strong. The house is secure." I raised my hands into the light, turning them over, examining the roadmap of my life etched into the skin. They were a plumber's hands. A father's hands. And tonight, they had been the hands of a hero. But most importantly, they were hands my daughter was finally proud to hold. And in the end, that was the only thing I had ever truly wanted to build.